like, bro, yeah, she got a kid. Look at his back. Oh my god.
Yo, what's up? Welcome back. We're gonna be reacting to facts about slavery they don't teach at school.
Yeah, I mean, when it came to slavery, they didn't teach you nothing. Like, it was like a page in a
Well,
picture.
I guess they taught us.
Yeah, when in high school?
Yeah.
I'm talking about when we were kids. They didn't say nothing about it.
Yeah,
they
but why would...
more... You mean, why wouldn't they? That's a part of American history. Like,
I would say, like, middle school, they didn't. I mean, that's probably the most important.
I mean, if they can teach us about sex and why your penis is erecting, I'm pretty sure they can teach us about why my ancestors got whipped with a slave.
Yeah.
I mean, got whipped with a slave. Got whipped.
Slave got whipped.
Got whipped as a slave. Whatever. You know what I'm talking about. But they can talk about the Aztec for like 5 pages.
Yeah, like we're talking about the Boston Tea Party.
Boston Tea Party.
Can we get it?
But yeah, Thomas Sowell, man, enjoy watching his videos. He got good insight, good facts. Like the last one he was talking about, like some of the language coming from Britain and all that. Like people don't really tend to think about the language you're speaking right now. Like it's a derivative of a Germanic language.
Right.
Yeah. Well, yeah, if y'all enjoying this reaction, make sure to like button, subscribe, and share, man. It's the road to 10K subscribers. Finna hop right into this video.
I wonder how it like changed over time.
Nowhere have intellectuals seen racial issues as issues about intertemporal abstractions more so than in discussions of slavery. Moreover, few facts of history have been so distorted by highly selective filtering as has the history of slavery. To many people today, slavery means white people holding black people in bondage. The vast millions of people around the world who were neither white nor black, but who were either slaves or enslavers for centuries, fade out of this vision of slavery as if they had never existed, even though they may well have outnumbered both blacks and whites. It has been estimated that there were more slaves in India than in the entire Western Hemisphere. China, during the era of slavery, has been described as one of the largest and most comprehensive markets for the exchange of human beings in the world. Slaves were a majority of the population in some of the cities in Southeast Asia. At some period or other in history, as John Stuart Mill pointed out, almost every people now civilized have consisted, in majority, of slaves. When Abraham Lincoln said, "If slavery is not wrong, nothing is wrong," he was expressing an idea peculiar to Western civilization at that time, and by no means universally accepted throughout Western civilization. What seems almost incomprehensible today is that there was no serious challenge to the moral legitimacy of slavery prior to the 18th century. Christian monasteries in Europe and Buddhist monasteries in Asia both had slaves. Even Thomas More's fictional ideal society, Utopia, had slaves. Although intellectuals today may condemn slavery as a...
Like you said, man, think of the Roman Empire. They conquered modern France, parts of modern Germany, all of Italy, the Baltic states, England, Hispania. All these tribes are coming into and they're conquering them, they're turning them into slaves. I think the relationship that the Romans had with their slaves was a lot different back then. Like you could actually like earn your freedom or something like that. Like
How would they earn their freedom?
Like you would work, but not really work. Like if you're like if your slave holder like died or something like that, then you would like left free. You were a free man. Most civilizations practice slavery. I mean, and this was not that long ago. This was maybe like 150 years ago. There's still places now that practice slavery. It's just like, since we're in the U.S. and we're just like so far away from everything, we're just so filtered out of it. Like they don't talk about that stuff in the news. They don't talk about how there's slaves in Libya right now.
Historic evil of our society. What was peculiar about Western society was not that it had slaves, like other societies around the world, but that it was the first civilization to turn against slavery, and that it spent more than a century destroying slavery, not only within Western civilization itself, but also in other countries around the world, over the often bitter and sometimes armed resistance of people in other societies. Only the overwhelming military power of Western nations during the age of imperialism made this possible. Slavery did not quietly die out of its own accord. It went down fighting to the bitter end in countries around the world, and it has still not totally died out to this day in parts of the Middle East and Africa. It is the image of racial slavery, white people enslaving black people, that has been indelibly burned into the consciousness of both black and white Americans today by the intelligentsia, and not simply as a fact about the past, but as a causal factor used to explain much of the present, and an enduring moral condemnation of the enslaving race. Yet two crucial facts have been filtered out of this picture. One, the institution of slavery was not based on race, and two, whites as well as blacks were enslaved. The very word slave is derived from the name of a European people.
Do your homework.
I was just confused on why were they just sitting out there saying so sorry, chained up those white people. I'm like, that's just so cringe, man. That's just
white people expressing their guilt, like, feeling guilty for black people. You know, like these liberals in the news telling black people how to feel guilty. Like we understand.
We feel guilty for you.
We understand you, black man. We understand your history, and we're going to tell you. We're going to give you this month, and if we're going to give you everything within this month, then after this month, we're going to talk about everybody else. But like you said, there were white people who were slaves before Africans even came to America. They were indentured servants from England, like they were like religious. Exile, like they were exiled because of their religion or something like that. So they were in America as indentured servants. It wasn't until a majority of African slaves were coming over and they were a cheap source of labor now. And now you have these slaves who were almost seen as, I don't know, it was kind of like because like you don't really see like the racial tone come into effect until after a rebellion had happened with this something brown. If I can just get a picture of him, I'm gonna put him up in a video. But after his rebellion, you see these rich elites, they wanted to protect their land, so they propagated this notion that you're poor, but at least you're not a slave.
Right.
So this kind of created like this racial tension between the poor whites and the slaves.
And that's why they went to go work for the whites, because it didn't have nothing else.
Yeah.
Slavs, who were enslaved for centuries before the first African was brought in bondage to the Western Hemisphere. It was not only in English that the word for slave derived from the word for Slav. The same was true in various other European languages and in Arabic. For most of the history of slavery, which covers most of the history of the human race, most slaves were not racially different from those who enslaved them. Not only did Europeans enslave Europeans, Asians enslaved other Asians, Africans enslaved other Africans, Polynesians enslaved other Polynesians, and the indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere enslaved other indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere.
Look at the Aztecs.
Moreover, after it became both technologically and economically feasible to transport masses of slaves from one continent to another, that is, to have a whole population of slaves of a different race, Europeans as well as Africans were enslaved and transported from their native lands to bondage on another continent. Pirates alone transported 1 million Europeans as slaves to the Barbary coast of North Africa, at least twice as many European slaves as there were African slaves transported to the United States and to the 13 colonies from which it was formed. Moreover, white slaves were still being bought and sold in the Islamic world decades after blacks had been freed in the United States. What marked the modern era of slavery in the West was the fact that, as distinguished historian Daniel Boorstin pointed out, now, for the first time in Western history, the status of slave coincided with the difference of race. But to claim that race or racism was the basis of slavery is to cite as a cause something that happened thousands of years after its supposed effect. As for the legacy of slavery in the world of today, that is something well worth investigating, as distinguished from simply making sweeping assumptions. Too many assumptions that have been made about the effects of slavery on both blacks and whites will not stand up under scrutiny. Back during the era of slavery in the United States, such prominent writers as the French visitor and observer Alexis de Tocqueville, northern traveler in the antebellum South, Frederick Law Olmsted, and prominent southern writer Hinton Helper all pointed to striking differences between the North and the South, and attributed the deficiencies of the southern region to the effects of slavery on the white population of the South. These differences between northern and southern whites were not merely perceptions or stereotypes, they were factually demonstrable in areas ranging from literacy rates to rates of unwed motherhood, as well as in attitudes toward work and violence. But attributing these differences to slavery ignored the fact that the ancestors of white Southerners differed in these same ways from the ancestors of white Northerners, when they both lived in different parts of Britain and when neither had ever seen a black slave. Does the moral enormity of slavery give it any more decisive causal weight in explaining the situation of blacks today than it did in explaining that of whites in the antebellum South? There is no a priori answer to that question, which must be examined empirically, like many other questions. The fact that so many black families today consist of women with fatherless children has been said by many to be a legacy of slavery. Yet most black children grew up in two-parent families, even under slavery itself, and for generations thereafter. As recently as 1960, 2/3 of black children were still living in two-parent families. A century ago, a slightly higher percentage of blacks were married than were whites. In some years, a slightly higher percentage of blacks were in the labor force than were whites. The reasons for changes for the worse in these and other patterns must be sought in our own times. Whatever the reasons for the disintegration of the black family, it escalated to the current disastrous level well over a century after the end of slavery, though less than a generation after a large expansion of the welfare state and its accompanying non-judgmental ideology. To say that slavery will not bear the full weight of responsibility for all subsequent social problems among black Americans is not to say that it had negligible consequences among either blacks or whites, or that its consequences ended when slavery itself ended. But this is only to say that answers to questions about either slavery or race must be sought in facts, not in assumptions or visions, and certainly not in attempts to reduce questions of causation to only those which provide moral melodramas and an opportunity for the intelligentsia to be on the side of the angels.
Yeah.
What's it called? Black people.
What he said towards the end, like the welfare state. I gotta study that. I gotta study that some more and just really understand. Because if you watch old movies with black families, we're like, you see the interactions, like the community's more lively. You got more people like willing to interact with one another.
People out their doors and stuff.
You have to ask the dad to take the daughter out. I know Mr. Peterson, and I see Mabel look, and my name is Keyshawn, and Mabel's a good girl, and I got me a good job. I got me a matter, but I just think it's just a lack of knowledge. Watching videos like this and being able to grasp history in the right way and being able to constitute the future around that, I feel like that'd be a lot better if people was going out blindly off of these facts that they
think they heard.
Yeah, they think they heard or they think they know. You gotta really learn these things. Like, I'm gonna look into the welfare stuff and really try to understand why black people got to where they are now. But yeah, if you enjoyed the reaction, make sure to like, subscribe, and share. It's really 10K subscribers. See you next time, baby.
Peace.